Summer, the season of fun, freedom, and endless possibilities. But sometimes, the warmth brings more than just good times. It can attract the darker side of humanity, turning paradise into a nightmare. Today, we're diving into 5 bone-chilling true summer horror stories that'll make you think twice about your next vacation. So grab your sunscreen and hold on tight. Things are about to get scary. The sun may be shining, but darkness lurks just around the corner. Story 1. The Train to Nowhere. It was supposed to be the adventure of a lifetime for best friends Jack and Chase. 2 free spirits, guitars in hand, ready to hop trains and chase their dreams of music stardom. They'd spent years playing small gigs in their hometown, dreaming of something bigger. The open road called to them, promising fame, fortune, and endless inspiration. Their journey began innocently enough, busking on street corners in Denver. The summer air was thick with possibility, and their music drew crowds of tourists and locals alike. It was on one of these corners that they met Marty, an old drifter with a glint in his eye that spoke of wild adventures and hidden knowledge. Marty's eyes gleamed with excitement as he spoke of a secret music festival deep in the South. "It's where legends are born," he said, voice low and conspiratorial. "I've got it all planned out. Train routes, schedules, everything. You boys want in?" Jack was hesitant. Something about Marty set off alarm bells in his head, but Chase's enthusiasm was infectious. "Come on, man," he urged Jack. "This could be our big break." Before they knew it, they were stowing away in a rickety boxcar, the rhythm of the rails carrying them towards an unknown destiny. The countryside rushed by in a blur of green and gold, summer's bounty on full display. Jack tried to focus on writing new songs, but an uneasy feeling gnawed at his gut. As night fell, Marty pulled out a small bag of black tar heroin. "This'll make the ride smoother," he grinned, his teeth yellowed and crooked in the dim light. Jack had never touched the stuff, but Chase eagerly accepted. "Just this once," he assured Jack, "to celebrate our adventure." Soon, both Chase and Marty were nodding off in a hazy euphoria. Jack strummed his guitar softly, trying to shake off his growing sense of dread. The train's whistle echoed mournfully in the night, a banshee's wail warning of dangers ahead. Hours later, Jack awoke to shouting and the sound of splintering wood. Rough hands dragged them from the boxcar, fists and boots raining down. Through swollen eyes, Jack saw railway workers beating them mercilessly. "Damn hobos," one worker spat. "Teach you to ride for free." They were dumped in an unknown town, broken and bleeding. As Jack struggled to his feet, he realized with horror that Chase wasn't moving. His best friend lay motionless, eyes glassy, a trickle of dried vomit on his chin. The train to nowhere had claimed its first victim. Panicked, Jack fled into the night, leaving behind his dreams, his guitar, and the lifeless body of his friend. Summer's promise of adventure had turned into a nightmare of addiction and death. As dawn broke, Jack found himself alone in a strange town, haunted by the memory of Chase's vacant stare. The music festival, if it had ever existed, now seemed like a cruel joke. Jack's summer of freedom had become a prison of guilt and regret. Story 2. The Ice Cream Man Cometh. Sarah and Emma laughed as they raced down the forest path, eager for ice cream by the lake. The air was thick with pine and childhood joy. "Last one's a rotten egg," Sarah shouted, sprinting ahead. Emma followed, their laughter echoing through the trees. Suddenly, the sound of a twig snapping halted their fun. Sarah looked back, her blood running cold. A figure in a long black coat, face obscured by a hood, stood motionless among the trees. The oppressive heat made the coat even more unsettling. "Emma," Sarah whispered, gripping her friend's arm. "Someone's watching us." Emma's face paled. "What do we do?" "Run!" Sarah urged. They fled, their hearts racing as heavy footsteps echoed behind them. They burst into the lakeside clearing, where the ice cream shop's cheerful sign now seemed grotesque. Desperate, Sarah yanked Emma towards the boat rental shack. "We need to get on the water," she gasped. The old man at the shack looked alarmed but didn't question them. Soon they were paddling frantically into the lake, the kayak slicing through the dark water. As night fell, their terror grew. The hooded figure paced the shoreline, never breaking eye contact. Sarah's hands trembled as she called her mother. "Mom, you need to come get us. There's someone after us." An agonizing wait ended when headlights finally pierced the darkness. Sarah and Emma paddled back to shore, their eyes locked on the tree line. Sarah's mother embraced them, confused by their fear. As they drove away, Sarah glimpsed the figure fading into the shadows. The ice cream man would forever taint their summer memories, a dark specter lurking at the edges of their innocence. Story 3. The Cabin in the Woods. Mark couldn't believe their luck. His wife Mary had inherited her family's old cabin, nestled in the mountains far from the noise and chaos of the city. It was the perfect place to raise their kids and live off the grid, a chance to reconnect with nature and each other. "This is it, honey," Mark said as they pulled up to the rustic cabin. "Our slice of paradise." At first, it was idyllic. Days were spent exploring the wilderness, and nights gathered around the crackling fireplace. The kids, James and Sylvia, thrived in the open air, their laughter echoing through the trees. Mark and Mary felt the stress of city life melting away with each passing day. But then the kids started talking about the strange man they'd seen watching the cabin from the trees. "He looks angry," James said one night, his voice small, "like he doesn't want us here." Mark brushed off their concerns, chalking it up to overactive imaginations. "It's probably just a deer," he assured them. "Nothing to worry about." But he couldn't ignore the footprints in the mud around the generator or the way it mysteriously stopped working one night. And there were the sounds. Twigs snapping in the darkness, the sensation of eyes watching them from the forest. One evening, as Mark worked on repairing the cabin's rickety porch, he felt eyes boring into his back. He turned slowly, heart racing, to see a figure standing at the tree line. The man's wild hair and unkempt beard couldn't hide the predatory gleam in his eyes. "This is my land," the stranger growled, brandishing a rusted axe. "You don't belong here." Mark's blood ran cold as he realized their dream home had become a nightmare. The idyllic forest suddenly felt like a green prison, with a madman as their warden. Summer's warmth had invited in a darkness they might never escape. "Listen," Mark said, trying to keep his voice steady. "This cabin belongs to my wife's family. We have every right to be here." The man's eyes narrowed. "Family?" he spat. "I've been watching this place for years. Ain't seen no family." Mark's mind raced. How long had this man been out here? What had he done to Mary's relatives who used to visit the cabin? "We're leaving," Mark said, backing towards the cabin door. "We'll be gone by morning." The man grinned, revealing rotted teeth. "Smart move, city boy. Wouldn't want anything to happen to those pretty kids of yours." That night, as they packed their belongings, Mark and Mary argued in hushed tones. Should they call the police? Would anyone even respond out here? The kids huddled together, wide-eyed and afraid. As dawn broke, they loaded up their car. Mark looked back at the cabin one last time, their summer dream now tainted by fear. Movement caught his eye. The man stood at the edge of the clearing, axe in hand, watching them leave. Mark gunned the engine, tires spitting gravel as they fled. Their off-grid adventure had become a cautionary tale. Sometimes, Mark realized, the real monsters weren't in the city. They're waiting in the wilderness, where no one can hear you scream. Story 4. The Hitchhiker's Warning. Lily hummed along to the radio, windows down, enjoying the summer breeze as she cruised down the lonely highway. College was over, and a bright future beckoned. Life couldn't get better. The road stretched out before her, an endless ribbon of possibility. She spotted a figure up ahead, thumb out, an old man with a weathered face and kind eyes. Against her better judgment, Lily pulled over. It was broad daylight after all, and she'd always believed in karma. "Where are you headed?" she asked as he climbed in. The old man smelled of dust and something darker, almost like decay. "Wherever you're going, darlin'," he replied with a toothless grin. "Just needed to deliver a message." Lily's smile faltered. "A message?" The old man's eyes suddenly looked ancient and full of sorrow. "Summer's almost over, child. The harvest is coming, and you're the crop." Before Lily could respond, the man vanished. No sound, no flash of light. Just gone, leaving behind only the faint scent of rot. Lily screamed, swerving the car to the shoulder. She looked around wildly, but there was no sign of the old man. Shaken, Lily drove on. But as the sun began to set, painting the sky in ominous shades of red, she noticed more hitchhikers lining the road, all with the same weathered faces and sorrowful eyes, all watching her car pass with hungry anticipation. With trembling hands, Lily pressed the accelerator. Whatever harvest was coming, she knew she had to outrun it. Summer's carefree days were over. A long, dark night was approaching. The hitchhikers became more frequent as darkness fell. They stood silently by the roadside, eyes gleaming in her headlights. Lily's knuckles were white on the steering wheel. She didn't dare stop, not even when her gas gauge dipped dangerously low. As midnight approached, Lily saw lights ahead. A small town, Salvation. But as she entered the city limits, her heart sank. The streets were lined with the ancient hitchhikers, all turning to watch her pass. Lily sped through the deserted town, panic tightening her chest. The streets were eerily silent, every building dark and foreboding. Since picking up the old man, no other cars had moved. As she reached the town's edge, she saw the old man again, standing in the middle of the road with arms outstretched. His eyes glowed with a sinister light. "The harvest is here," he intoned, his voice unnatural and chilling. Lily screamed and floored the gas pedal. The old man's sorrowful smile was the last thing she saw before her car passed through him like smoke. She drove all night, pursued by shadows and eerie whispers. At dawn, she was back where she started, realizing that the warmth of summer was a deceit. The world was cold, dark, and hungry. Story 5. The Last Shift. Jamie sighed as she locked up the gas station, eager to start her date. It had been a long, hot summer of work, but things were looking up. A cute exchange student was waiting, and in 2 weeks she'd be off to college. Freedom was so close she could taste it. "Big date tonight?" a familiar voice asked. Jamie's heart sank. It was him again, the creepy regular who always seemed to show up during her shifts. Jamie forced a smile, hand tightening on her keys. "Yeah, actually, gotta run." But he blocked her path, looming over her. "When that foreigner leaves, give me a shot instead." Jamie's stomach churned as she brushed past him. "Thanks, but I'm not interested." If only that was the end of it. For weeks he tormented her, always there, always watching, asking her out, commenting on her looks. Jamie's summer paradise became a sweaty, fluorescent-lit hell. She changed her shifts, parked her car differently, anything to avoid him, but he always seemed to know when she was working. Her coworkers noticed her anxiety. "You okay, Jamie?" her manager asked one day. "You seem on edge." Jamie wanted to tell him everything, but what could she say? The guy hadn't done anything illegal. He was just creepy. "I'm fine," she lied, "just ready for summer to be over." Then came her birthday shift. As Jamie stocked the cooler, she heard the door open behind her. Her blood ran cold as she recognized the heavy footsteps. "Employees only," she called out, trying to keep her voice steady. But when she turned, there he stood, grinning, holding out a small package. "Happy birthday," he leered. Before Jamie could react, he grabbed her wrist, pressed something into her palm, and vanished. The whole encounter lasted seconds, but to Jamie, it felt like an eternity. With shaking hands, she opened the package. It was drugs. Jamie's mind reeled as she realized how close she'd come to being trapped alone with a predator. Her summer of independence had become a nightmare of vulnerability. Tears streaming down her face, Jamie ran to her manager's office. Between sobs, she told him everything. The stalking, the comments, and now the drugs. Her manager's face darkened as he listened. "I'm calling the police," he said firmly. "This ends now." As Jamie gave her statement, fear gnawed at her despite the stalker's ban from the store. Shadows seemed to writhe with his sinister presence on her drive home. The remaining weeks of summer blurred into anxiety. Every sound made her flinch. Every stranger seemed threatening. Packing for college, she felt his eyes on her, an unshakable sense of being hunted. On her last day in town, Jamie saw him across the street, his gaze piercing through the crowd before he vanished. As she drove away, her hand shook uncontrollably. The stalker's shadow would haunt her forever, tainting the memory of her once carefree summer. Story 6. The Midnight Swim. Lena's summer job as a lifeguard at Lake Shimmer seemed perfect. Days spent basking in the sun, nights off to party with her fellow guards. But as July faded into August, whispers of the lake's dark history began to surface. "You know about the drownings, right?" Jake, a veteran lifeguard, asked one evening. Lena shook her head, intrigued. Jake's eyes gleamed in the firelight as he leaned in close. "Every 7 years on the last full moon of summer, someone disappears. They say the lake hungers." Lena laughed it off, but a chill ran down her spine. That night, unable to sleep, she found herself drawn to the shore. The full moon hung low, casting an eerie glow across the water. As Lena's toes touched the cool surface, she heard it, a faint melody drifting across the lake. Entranced, Lena waded deeper. The song grew louder, more insistent. Suddenly, something brushed against her leg. Panicked, she tried to turn back, but tendrils of mist coiled around her ankles, pulling her under. Lena thrashed, lungs burning. In the murky depths, she saw them, pale, bloated faces of past victims, their dead eyes pleading. As consciousness faded, Lena realized with horror that she'd become part of the lake's legend. The next morning, her fellow lifeguards found only a discarded whistle on the shore. Lake Shimmer's glassy surface revealed nothing of the previous night's terror. But deep below, Lena joined the chorus of lost souls, waiting to lure the next victim when the lake's hunger awakened once more. Weeks passed, and Lena's disappearance became another tragic statistic. But for Jake, the guilt was unbearable. He should have warned her more strongly, should have told her the whole truth. On the last night of summer, Jake stood at the lake's edge, the full moon reflecting off the water like an accusing eye. The melody started soft, almost imperceptible. Jake recognized Lena's voice in the haunting chorus. "I'm sorry," he whispered, tears streaming down his face. As if in response, the water began to churn. Ghostly hands reached out, grabbing at Jake's ankles. He didn't resist. The lake pulled him in, its icy embrace a welcome punishment for his silence. As Jake sank into the depths, he saw Lena's face among the drowned. Her eyes, once vibrant, now milky and lifeless, locked onto his. At that moment, Jake understood the true nature of Lake Shimmer's curse. It wasn't just hunger that drove the lake, it was loneliness. Each victim added to its collective consciousness, a twisted family bound for eternity in watery graves. And now Jake was joining them, another voice in the siren song that would lure future victims to their doom. As his lungs filled with water, Jake's last thought was a grim realization. The cycle would continue, an endless summer nightmare feeding the lake's insatiable appetite for companionship and suffering. Story 7. The Lost Campers. In the summer of 2023, a severe heat wave gripped the small town of Millbrook, with temperatures soaring above 100 degrees Fahrenheit. Despite the sweltering heat, friends Ethan, Sarah, Tom, and Lisa decided to camp in the nearby Pinewood Forest, hoping for some relief under the trees. They set up camp near a serene lake, the water glistening under the hot sun. They spent the day swimming and trying to stay cool. As evening approached, the temperature barely dropped, and an oppressive heat lingered. They lit a campfire, but the flames struggled against the stifling atmosphere. As night fell, the forest became eerily quiet. The usual sounds of chirping crickets and rustling leaves were absent, replaced by an unsettling stillness. The friends sat around the fire, sharing stories and trying to ignore the suffocating heat. Suddenly, a loud rustling noise broke the silence. Ethan stood up, flashlight in hand, and peered into the darkness. "Probably just an animal," he said, trying to reassure the others. But the rustling grew louder and closer. Tom grabbed a branch from the fire, holding it like a torch. "Let's check it out," he suggested. Ethan and Tom ventured into the woods, their flashlights casting long, flickering shadows. The heat was unbearable, even at night, and sweat dripped from their faces. They followed the noise, which seemed to move deeper into the forest. After a few minutes of walking, they stumbled upon a clearing. In the center stood an old, abandoned cabin. The door creaked open, and a blast of hot air hit their faces. Ethan shone his flashlight inside, revealing a room filled with old camping gear and dusty furniture. "Looks like someone used to camp here," Tom said, stepping inside. Suddenly, the door slammed shut behind them. The temperature in the cabin skyrocketed and the air became thick and stifling. Ethan and Tom pounded on the door, but it wouldn't budge. Panic set in as the heat became unbearable. Back at the campfire, Sarah and Lisa heard their friends' frantic cries. They grabbed their own flashlights and rushed into the forest, following the sounds. When they reached the clearing, they saw the cabin and heard Ethan and Tom shouting for help. Sarah and Lisa tried to open the door, but it was searing hot to the touch. "We need to find another way in," Sarah said, her voice trembling with fear. They circled the cabin and found a small window. Using a rock, Lisa broke the glass and they climbed inside. The heat inside the cabin was oppressive, like being trapped in an oven. They found Ethan and Tom lying on the floor, struggling to breathe. Together, they forced the door open, and the four friends stumbled out into the cooler night air. Gasping for breath, they made their way back to their campsite. The next morning, they packed up their gear and left Pinewood Forest. The heat wave continued, but they were grateful to be alive. The experience had shaken them to their core, and they couldn't shake the feeling that something sinister lurked in the forest. As they drove back to Millbrook, Ethan glanced at the rearview mirror, half expecting to see the cabin disappear into thin air. He knew they'd never forget the summer when the heat wave turned their camping trip into a nightmare. So whether you're camping in the woods, working a summer job, or just enjoying the sunshine, always stay alert. Because you never know when paradise might become a nightmare. The warm embrace of summer can quickly turn into a stranglehold of fear. Stay safe out there, and maybe think twice before picking up that hitchhiker or taking that shortcut through the woods. Summer may be ending, but these stories will chill you long into the dark nights ahead. Sleep tight, and don't let the summer bugs bite. If you're drawn to more chilling tales and spine-tingling encounters, subscribe to our channel and stay on edge. The darkness has many faces, and we'll keep uncovering them for you.